Hello, everyone. Welcome to Carpet City Cinema, a Gila Films podcast. I'm your host, David Weaver. And if you're joining us after listening to last week's first guest episode that we ever did with filmmaker Jay Leonard, one thing we didn't cover in that interview was that Break Glass, his recent directorial effort on the film festival circuit, just got accepted into another festival, another event, and that would be the Catskill International Film Festival. So a big, once again, well-deserved shout out to Jay and his team for the success with that. And Jay also was kind enough to kind of give me some pointers on how to improve the quality of these podcasts, the audio quality. So hopefully that's coming through right now as well. On the Gila Films front, The Last Frankenstein is now officially over 180,000 views on the Gila Films YouTube channel, which is just incredible. Really just thank everyone for watching it and sharing news about it, and just please continue to do so. It's obviously it's on several platforms now, but YouTube is one that has such accessibility, such visibility, and it's one where you can actually kind of really see the views as opposed to like Prime. So definitely, if you can guide people towards that outlet, that's really helpful. And it's commercial free and free to watch. So all the best stuff right there. Also, coming up in a couple of months, we're going to be adding another video to the YouTube channel just in time for Christmas. And what that is in collecting film prints here and there, I do a little bit of that. I was able to acquire a print of a half-an-hour program from 1952 titled "A Star Shall Rise." So I'm a big fan of both not only the holidays in general. I was a big Christmas kid when I was younger. Always got really excited about Christmas and Halloween and Easter, Thanksgiving, but just not the more obvious things like getting gifts, although I do love that, not gonna lie, but also just everything that kind of goes into those days. And the Christmas, for example, the decorating of the tree and the just the winter, the onset of winter, which unfortunately is taking place later now, it seems like, past Christmas. But, seeing that first snowfall and stuff, playing Christmas music, all the stuff that you kind of associate with that time, I really enjoy it all. And hand in hand with that, as a film lover, is of course watching Christmas movies. And my girlfriend and I, there are certain ones we go to every year, like White Christmas, It's a Wonderful Life, but also we watch a lot of Christmas TV episodes, usually older ones. And I love, the more obscure, the better for me. I mean, I do love a lot of the standards. I love the Honeymooners Christmas episode with they have the party at their house, and people keep dropping by, all these celebrities. Both my girlfriend and I are big fans of the Bob Newhart show from the 70s, and they did a Christmas episode every season. So we'll watch all 6 of those pretty much every December. But also, some of them were really rare ones. They're really kind of hard to find ones that either were from lesser-known shows, or maybe it was from an anthology show. So, just kind of a random episode that might have to do with the Christmas season. Those really kind of intrigued me. And some of them you can see on YouTube, but also there's these kind of like budget label packs of like public domain or quote unquote public domain product. Mill Creek's put some of them out. They'll have on those some of those like more low profile titles. And A Star Shall Rise was on one of those sets that I had purchased, one of those DVDs I had purchased. And it was an episode of an anthology show in the 50s called Family Theater. And it's this episode, which aired on Christmas Day in 1952. It's just a retelling of the Nativity story. The birth of Jesus and the 3 wise men and the shepherds and all that stuff. But one of the things that kind of really intrigued me about it was its cast. It had a who's who of character actors in this. Now, we've talked several times about how big of a Perry Mason fan I am, how much I love that. He plays one of the 3 wise men, Raymond Burr, in this episode. And the other 2 wise men are played by a couple well-known character actors, Richard Hale, perhaps best known for playing Boo Radley's father in To Kill a Mockingbird, and John Crawford, who was the sheriff on The Waltons and was in the Gene Hackman neo-noir Night Moves, had a really key role in that. King Herod in this episode, in this Christmas episode, is played by Morris Ankrum, who, if you're a fan of Perry Mason, you know him as one of the regular actors they went to play a judge, but also fans of 1950s science fiction and horror movies are very familiar with him because it seemed like in every other movie of that decade, being a science fiction movie, he was playing some type of military officer. And also in the cast, you have Anthony Caruso playing kind of like the lead shepherd, watching their flocks by night, so to speak. Caruso, again, just a very veteran character actor, very familiar face and voice. A lot of gangster roles. In fact, he played a gangster on an episode of the original Star Trek when they go to the planet where the inhabitants have adopted the ways of the mobs of the 1920s. And Henry Brandon, he's probably best known as playing Scar, the Native American chief nemesis of John Wayne's character in The Searchers. So it's this really great mix of character actors of the time who you're kind of really very, very familiar with from television programming and from kind of like the genre movies, stuff that I really love. And even throw in there very briefly at the end, Mary, Jesus' mother, is a scene, and she's played by Donna Martell, who is actually a leading lady in two genre-esque movies of the late 40s, early 50s, the comedy, mystery, horror movie, however you want to call it, Abbott and Costello Meet the Killer Boris Karloff. She was kind of like the female ingenue of that. And then Project Moonbase, the early 50s, very low-budget Robert Heinlein science fiction movie. The other thing that kind of interested me about this Christmas program when I first saw it is it was directed by a guy named John Brahm. And Brahm was someone who I don't think was really necessarily got tons of attention at the time that he was working, but has since gathered quite a bit of recognition. In fact, when Fox Video, 20th Century Fox, decided to release a DVD set of horror classics, they did 2 volumes. And the first volume was all John Brahm movies. It was 3 of his films. And it included The Lodger from the 1944, which is probably his best-known film. It's a remake of the Alfred Hitchcock movie from the late 20s. It's a retelling of the story of Jack the Ripper. And also in the set is Hangover Square, which I believe came out in 45, which reunited Brahm with actor Laird Krieger, who had played the Jack the Ripper-esque character in The Lodger. And also the third film in the set is The Undying Monster, which was a werewolf movie from 1942, I think. And the thing about Brahm that really kind of stands out in his work is it's almost like he approaches things with this film noirish sensibility, regardless of the fact that these aren't, really film noirs. These are horror suspense films. But he did another film, not at Fox, but at RKO in 1946 called The Locket, which is one of my all-time favorite movies. Highly recommended it. Warner Brothers has it out on DVD. And that film was kind of like this psychological noir. It's a very fascinating film about basically the telling of the story of the main female character played by Lorraine Day. And I don't want to go too much into it because I think that should deserve its own spotlight sometime. I think I'd like to revisit that and take a deeper dive into that movie. But basically, it's a movie that unravels as a flashback within a flashback within a flashback. And it just has so much depth to the story. But it's, again, filmed with this really striking visual style, great use of miniatures, great use of lighting and shadows, and that's what Brahm was known for that. And other films people might be familiar with him that he directed. He did the 3D Vincent Price movie, The Mad Magician. He also directed at least one episode of The Twilight Zone, maybe more. And so he was the director on this. I wouldn't say that it showcases that kind of style he's known for as much as some of those other works, but it's still just interesting to see what he brings to this. So, again, this has only really had budget label releases. It's shown up on these dollar DVDs, 50 movie sets. I'm sure it's on YouTube and some low quality copies. And I was able to get a hold of a 16mm print of it in pretty good condition. I think there was only one splice, one break in it. Didn't seem to even be missing much. Not too much damage to it. And a guy I know was able to do a scan of it for me. And looks really good. And so for Christmas, I thought it'd be really cool to put that up on the YouTube channel. To finally have a nice restored copy of that. I've just got to do a little tweaking of the digital file in my editing software just to kind of fix where that splices and stuff. But the main work, the scanning, is done. So I'm thinking probably the weekend, following Thanksgiving. We'll put that up there. So definitely stay tuned to the YouTube channel. If you're not subscribing to our Gila Films channel, please do so. And that way you'll get notified of whenever these videos might come up, and hoping to do other things like that too. In fact, I talked to was it last week, about the Mohawk carpet reel that I found, the special. And at that same sale, a couple of the other reels I ended up taking with me were holiday themed ones, stuff that I don't know is, it's like, again, educational films that would have been shown to classes, but stuff that hasn't had any really kind of good release, and which I'm going to try to get those scanned too as well, and maybe get those up there in time for some holidays. Now, turning over to the news, really interesting to see. Again, we've had this kind of theme in some previous episodes about talking about these kind of veteran directors coming back to the chair. We talked about with William Friedkin and David Mamet kind of coming back after not having directed for a while. And the article that really caught my eye today was Paul Schrader is getting ready to direct his next movie. Now, Schrader's never really stopped directing since he began in the 70s. Now, if you're not familiar with Paul Schrader, you could argue that he's better known even as a screenwriter than a director, because he wrote Raging Bull, Taxi Driver, The Last Temptation of Christ, The Mosquito Coast. But a number of the films he's also directed on his own are also very highly regarded. Movies like Hardcore with George C. Scott, which is an excellent film. Blue Collar, he directed Mishima, and got a lot of acclaim, and finally an Academy Award nomination for his film a few years ago called Firstborn with Ethan Hawke. But there seemed to be kind of this time in his directing where he was still working, but it seemed like he was almost kind of maybe on the verge of being forgotten as a director or overlooked, because he did Autofocus, the movie with Greg Kinnear and Willem Dafoe about Bob Crane, the actor from Hogan's Heroes. That came out in 2002, and that seemed to be like, that was well received, but it seemed after that a lot of the films he came out with just really struggled, and some of them were production problems. Like, he was hired to direct the fourth Exorcist film, and very infamously, basically the producers came in and didn't like his take on it, and so basically brought Rennie Harlin in, the action filmmaker, director of Die Hard 2, Cliffhanger, to direct essentially an entirely new film. I think there's some really ridiculously low percentage of footage that's shared between those two versions of Exorcist 4, and both cuts are now available. He did The Canyons. Paul Schrader did The Canyons, which was the movie with the star Lindsay Lohan and the adult film actor James Dean, no relation to the 50s actor. And that kind of got a lot of negative reception when it came out. His next movie after that was Dying of the Light with Nicolas Cage, which again I believe was recut against his wishes. And then Dog Eat Dog, which was him and Nicolas Cage reteaming again. But that again just seemed to go under the radar. And so you really have kind of like this 15-year period where a lot of his work, again, was either not getting much attention or being misunderstood or being recut. And it really was until First Reformed that kind of got him back into the limelight, I guess you could say. He followed that up with The Card Counter with Oscar Isaac, and just more recently Master Gardener with Joel Edgerton and Sigourney Weaver. But it was just announced that they're now starting rehearsals for his next movie, which is going to be titled Oh Canada. There's always rumors with Schrader, is this going to be his last film? It's hard, who knows? I think it's way too early to say that. But interesting thing about this movie is that it will reunite Schrader with Richard Gere, who was the star of Schrader's 1980 film American Gigolo, which was just kind of given new life as a series with John Bernthal. So this film, which is adapted from a novel titled Foregone by Russell Banks, and Banks, of course, was the writer of the source material for Schrader's film Affliction, which was probably one of his best received directorial efforts with Nick Nolte and James Coburn. And in this movie, Gere plays a acclaimed documentary filmmaker who's basically dying of cancer. He's up in Canada, and he wants to kind of have this soul-bearing interview to kind of just like demythologize his life. And so to conduct this interview, he has this former student of his, played by I don't know, I might be butchering his name, Jacob Elordi, who just played Elvis Presley in Sofia Coppola's Priscilla. He has him come up to do the interview, and apparently there's going to be, I think, some flashbacks involved because they mentioned that there'll be someone cast. Now that Gear's cast, they're going to try to find someone that similar like this to play him in younger versions. But I don't know whether or not this is being impacted by the current strike situation. I don't know if this is maybe being filmed in Canada or if that would affect anything or what's going on with this in relation to the strike. But they are doing rehearsals right now for it, so it sounds like they are planning to shoot it sooner rather than later. And so again, just cool to see Schrader continue to be at work. I think he's a very interesting. Not just an interesting filmmaker, but if you ever follow him on social media, follow him on Facebook, he's a very just interesting person to just digest his take on what's going on in life, what's going on in culture, what's going on in film in general. A very fascinating person. So I think his work always deserves to kind of have some attention when it comes out. Also back in action is the big G himself, Godzilla. Trailer just came out for the newest Godzilla film from Toho Studios, which is the company that is responsible for the original Godzilla film back in 1954 and all the subsequent sequels that have been going on for the last 60 years. Of course, Legendary Films in the U.S. has been producing their own MonsterVerse movies, such as Godzilla King of the Monsters, Godzilla vs. Kong, and you had the Matthew Broderick film back in the late 90s. But Toho is the founder and still maker of Godzilla. And so this new film, Godzilla Minus One, is the first one from Toho since 2016's Shin Godzilla, which was also known as Godzilla Resurgence. This trailer looks pretty good. It's set in post-war Japan, post-World War II. Not too much detail has been released about the plot, other than just that it's in that kind of late 40s time period. But I was actually, I was pretty impressed with the effects in the trailer and what it looks like where they're going with it. So excited to see how this shakes out. And then of course here with Legendary, they have a limited series coming up with Kurt Russell, and the next film in their franchise is Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire, which is coming out next year. Don't know when next year, but yeah, that's coming out next year. All right, without further ado, we're moving on to the movie of the week, going to the mid-'80s this time, 1984. For the film Firstborn, starring Christopher Collet, Terry Garr, and Peter Weller. Saw part of this movie many years ago. I think it was on TNT. Had no idea what the movie was. I mean, I was probably in my teens at the time, and I just remember catching a snippet of it and just getting the impression this was about some kind of like situation akin to The Stepfather, with some kind of psycho dad played by Peter Weller. Really had no idea what it was. Other than that in the title. And then not too long ago, for whatever reason, I had the director Michael Apted on the brain. The famous British director, he did the acclaimed 7 Up documentary series. My dad's a big fan of those, where it follows the same group of people, starting when they were 7 years old, and it follows them every 7 years. And the last one that came out prior to Apted's death was 63 Up. So they're now they were 63 at that time. He also directed such films as Coal Miner's Daughter, which won Sissy Spacek the Oscar. He did the James Bond film The World Is Not Enough. He did Thunderheart with Val Kilmer. And again, for whatever reason, he came into my mind, and I was kind of curious, like, well, what did he have going on in the 80s? Because I'm really familiar with a lot of his work from the 70s, the 90s, and up until he died. I know, like, the 80s, he did, like, Gorky Park, which was one of Lee Marvin's last movies. My grandfather was a fan of that, and that was, like, super early 80s, and I knew Gorillas in the Mist was in there somewhere with Sigourney Weaver. But I was like, what else did he do in the 80s? And I was kind of looking up his filmography, and I saw, like, okay, he did that Richard Pryor movie, Critical Condition, which didn't really go anywhere. And then I saw he did Firstborn. I had no idea that he directed that film, and then everything about that film kind of came back to me, and I checked the trailer out. I'm like, oh, this actually looks pretty interesting. It's not quite what it doesn't appear to be quite what I thought it was when I got that first impression years ago. And then I was, I assumed it wasn't out on any kind of physical media, and then I dug into it a little bit and actually saw, oh wow, this is Olive Films put this out, with our recently dearly departed physical media company. And so I kept my eye on the Blu-ray on Amazon until it started to sell down until like there's almost none left, and just snagged a copy. and checked it out. And it was interesting because you watch the trailer and it still gives you those vibes of being like a suspense, maybe horror adjacent title. Um, but that's not really totally what it is. So Christopher Calais plays the title character. His name's Jake. He's the oldest of two boys. The younger one is played by Corey Haim, making his film debut, and their mother is Terry Garr, and she's divorced. They're still on good terms with their dad. He's kind of though moved on a little bit in terms of like, the mother still kind of has a little bit of a fire she's burning for him, but he's now seeing someone else. They've had a long-term relationship. He travels a lot because he has a very successful job. So he's not ignoring his children. He stays in touch with them. He visits them when he can, but he's definitely someone whose life is still moving on for him. And as the realization sets into Terry Garr's character that he's kind of closed the book on their relationship, um, it kind of pushes forward in her the whole notion of just her being alone, and this is really kind of going to be just how it is. And she's seen some guys in the past. There's references to this boyfriend. You never see him really, but she had this long standing relationship with this one guy. But really, it's just kind of the news of that her ex-husband, that the boy's father is actually going to be marrying his girlfriend. That's what really is the catalyst that kind of really sets Gar to further deepen, I should say, this relationship with the guy she's just met, played by Peter Weller, RoboCop, and he plays a guy named Sam. And she does this. She starts moving pretty quickly within this relationship, even though she's kind of gets some warning messages from a friend of hers, and even obviously Jake, the older boy, has some concerns. But she's struggling. She's dealing poorly with just being single, being alone, being by herself, and now with her ex just really starting this whole new chapter in his life. So Jake and his brother, who's Corey Haim's character's name is Brian, they have kind of a very classical relationship. They love each other, they care about each other, but they're also like have that antagonism of like Brian taking Jake's stuff without asking, and Brian kind of gets into trouble at school, and Jake has to cover for him at times. But it's that classic love hate with love as the foundation relationship of an older brother and a younger sibling. Jake, he's not at the beginning of the film really necessarily looked at as the man of the family, quote unquote, or anything like that. He needs to kind of take that place because his father doesn't live in the house anymore. But there is a degree to which, because Terry Garr's mother is presumably at work and doing things, that he needs to perform certain responsibilities in terms of looking after his younger brother. But they have pretty normal lives. Jake gets along well with everyone at school. He's got a girlfriend played by a very young Sarah Jessica Parker, and this is just her second theatrically released movie. And also among his friends are a bunch of other who's, soon to be who's. We'll get into that later though. And it's really kind of the devolving of the relationship that their mother has with Sam, with Peter Weller's character, that really starts setting bad things in motion. So initially, independently of each other, really, both boys start to have some wariness of and some bad vibes about Sam. He's there's things he says about his life and what he wants to do with his life that just seem kind of contradictory. And there's a degree to which he tries to ingratiate himself with the boys by like buying things that they want, and showing similar interests that kind of starts to rub them the wrong way. And the focus is more so on Jake's reactions as the firstborn of the title. And as Jake just becomes more cognizant of Sam's true character, the fact that he's kind of this pie in the sky, irresponsible dreamer who is talking big about how he wants to start his own business, go into business for himself, but he's really not doing anything, and he's always kind of changing up what he wants to do with his life, what kind of big business he wants to go into. these kind of irresponsible, kind of shiftless aspects of his character, and combined with the speed at which the relationship is developing between him and his mother, it's very quickly that uh, Sam moves into the house. These things start to create tension within the household. And they create tension within Sam's overall life, where he then starts to have issues spilling out with his friends and with his girlfriend. And then, of course, these this tension spills out directly towards Sam, and they begin to develop this antagonistic relationship in which ideally you'd want Terry Garr to have his back, but she's kind of caught in the middle between the son she loves and this guy who she just can't really. She's not really totally being honest with herself about him, and probably because she just doesn't want to be by herself. And then again, I don't want to go into spoilers or anything like that. Obviously, you watch the trailer. This is not giving too much away, but there becomes eventually apparent that some of Weller's activities, some of the things that Sam is doing, some of the things he's bringing into the house are not just irresponsible, but actually go beyond that into areas of danger and illegality, shall we say. But yeah, you watch the trailer, you're kind of getting that like suspense vibe, again, that kind of thriller vibe. Like I said, when I was younger, I was thinking, oh, this is kind of like a stepfather kind of like film, but it really kind of isn't like any of that. I think that it kind of reminds me of what I've talked about in the past about films from the prior decade, the 70s, and why I like them so much, which is that they take characters and create them in a very well-drawn, very detailed, very full way. And they take these characters and then put them into a situation that is very well defined and very well created. And then they just, 1+1=2. They just let that character naturally play out within that situation, and whatever happens, happens. And it's, not about judging the characters or, saying this person's a good person or this person's a bad person. It's just, this is the character, this is the situation, put them together, let's see what happens. And that's one of the reasons I love that decade's film so much. And you see that in films like The French Connection, for example, or Dirty Harry. And this film is similar, obviously not similar to those in terms of grit, but similar in that that's really what this is. It's taking these very well-defined characters. I will really give the credit to this film for really drawing very realistic characters in this film who are expertly played. Really props all around to the cast of this movie. But yeah, it's taking these well-drawn characters of the sons. It's doing a really good job of fleshing out their relationship with each other, their relationship with their mother, the situation with their dad and how he's going to this next chapter of his life. Then bringing into this situation another very well-shaped character, which is Sam, and letting what happens happens. And like I said, kudos to Ron Koslow, the screenwriter of this, who's probably best known for he created the Beauty and the Beast TV show with Linda Hamilton, and as well as that short-lived but kind of cult show Roar with Heath Ledger. He also wrote such films as John Landis's Into the Night and the Sam Elliott movie Lifeguard. But I mean, I've known people like Terry Garr's character in this movie and Peter Weller's character and these boys. It's a situation and characters that are very relatable. You know them from your life, the person who just can't deal with the loneliness of being single, especially as a parent, and then the responsibility of having to raise your kids on your own, and also seeing like your ex move on and not handling all that in the responsible way that you really should. And just the whole idea of Terry Garr's character in this film, basically enabling Peter Weller to do the wrong that he does, to be creating this turmoil in the household that used to be peaceful before he moved in there, to be verbally abusive towards Jake, to kind of be bringing dangerous elements into the house. That's a very realistic character. I've known. I mean, in my head right now, I can think specifically of two people I know who have a relationship like this, who had one back in the past, and it's very true to form, though, the way this film plays out and how people just kind of are willing to stay in a toxic relationship and an abusive relationship, a relationship that's not just bad for them, but also abusive for those who they're responsible for, they're like their kids, and they just make excuses for why they have to keep doing it, regardless of what common sense does. And then how it's very realistic the way the film shows how that affects the children in the house outside the house, and how that kind of can plant the seeds. I mean, this film doesn't go that far into the future, but how that can plant the seeds for problems that they're going to have down the road in their own life. Again, everyone's good in this movie. I don't think there was a single false performance. Calais as Jake, he had just come off his first, this was only his second feature film. He had been in Sleepaway Camp prior to this, and then he would be in the Manhattan Project with John Lithgow. Eventually, just kind of in the 90s, somewhere transitioned to voice work, which he's pretty much been doing till this day. But just a great job. Really effectively plays the part of Jake, underplays it. Doesn't it's exactly the right note he needs to hit of this person who is his age, but also has some maturity slightly beyond his age. But he never comes across, one of the problems you can have with a character at this age, playing this kind of age, mid-teens in a film, is sometimes they act younger than really what that age is, or older than what that age is. And it's a tricky thing to hit right on that age, because when you're going through your teens, it's like every year is different, right? It's kind of like the 1960s. It starts out and it's like the Eisenhower era. Next thing you know, it's the Kennedy era. Next thing you know, it's Vietnam and the counterculture and the sex revolution and the civil rights movement. And every year, something new and totally different is happening. And that's the way kind of the teen years are as you go through puberty and whatnot. And so to play a specific age within that time period and to really nail it right without playing it as too young or too old, that can be tricky. Even if you are an actor who is that age, someone like respond by just saying, well, they just play themselves. Well, that's not always as easy as you think. And also it depends on the writing too, that the writing has to really be selling the right age. I've seen films where the writing is obviously for a character that's older than the character we're being shown, or younger. And so for Clay to land right on the mark, especially just his second feature film and as a lead, really. I mean, he gets the most screen time in this film. It's just really commendable for someone like that. I kind of wish obviously we all know the story about child actors and the ability to transition. He's not the only one to have to move on to voice work as he got older, but I just would have liked to have seen him kind of keep doing stuff down the road. I guess he and Haim stayed close in real life. They were later together in Prayer of the Roller Boys, and he was one of the pallbearers actually at Haim's funeral. But Haim too, just again, very young when he made this film, his very first movie, and completely natural in the part. Never seems fake, never seems forced. I think Terry Garr takes the top prize though in some ways, just because it's like, it's no surprise that she has the ability to deliver a dramatic performance, despite the fact that she's best known for her comic work, and that's what she got her Oscar nomination for, was Tootsie. But and of course, you know for like Young Frankenstein, and it's not her first dramatic role either, 'cause she had the Close Encounters and the Black Stallion, but it's just really, it's just such a realistic portrayal of such a really, I can't say any better than it's a realistic portrayal of a realistic character. It's completely she completely sells that person and that situation and that family and the downward spiraling dynamic, because of her choices that she makes. Weller, again, all around, a great job. He is that guy that I think we all know who, in my area where I live, in my lifetime, it's always like this guy who's always, you meet guys like that and they're always in contracting. You meet a guy like that and you're like, hey, what do you do for a living? He's like, I'm a contractor. And what that means is like a lot of times they don't actually have a job. They're not even owning their own contracting business. It's just kind of like what they say to cover for the fact that they're really not doing anything. And once in a while they go work for a buddy of theirs. And I know that guy really well. And that Weller's playing in this movie, whereas a lot of time in the film, it's one of the things that gets kind of focused on is how Jake will come home and in this film and after school, and Sam's just like hanging out on the couch watching TV, or he's playing a pinball game that he bought and brought into the house. Not really doing anything aggressive to pursue these big business ideas that he has in his mind. Yet at the same time, the thing about Sam is he's not self-aware of that. You know, he thinks um, he's got these big dreams in his head about he's going to do these things. He's going to be his own boss and start his own business, and things that didn't work out in the past aren't his fault. And people who kind of call him out for his BS are they're the problem, like, which is what Jake becomes. Uh, Interestingly, Weller was not the first choice for this role. Originally cast in the part of Sam was Tom Berenger. And they started filming this movie April 16th, 1984. And April 25th, there was a news report came out that Berenger was replaced by Peter Weller because Berenger had been in a car accident in Connecticut. So I don't know if they even got to filming any of Berenger's footage before that happened. But I was kind of wondering, I was thinking to myself, like, because I love Tom Berenger, a great actor too. Obviously, Academy Award nominee a couple years after this for Platoon. And I was wondering, what would it have been like for him to be in the role? Would he have been a better choice? But after thinking about it for a while, I think they were good to have Weller step into this role. I think he was the better of the choices. I don't think either one is worse or better as an actor. I think they're both very talented and both would have done a really good job filling this role. But I think what helps sell the character of Sam that Weller has on his side, part of it is just a big deal of it is his physicality. I mean, Weller's the kind of guy, he's at this point in his career, he's very lean, but in good shape, but very lean. Weller was known for having that kind of like almost gaunt-like appearance. It's one of the reasons he got cast as RoboCop, because they wanted someone who they could build the makeup effects on his face without on the face of the RoboCop actor without it looking too big or too large. So they wanted to find someone who basically had like a skinny, scrawny, skeletal face already, and Weller had that. But Weller, in playing the character Sam as this kind of guy, looking like this guy who, again, not someone you necessarily want to mess with, but at the same time, he's not some jacked up bulk dude. He's just very, very lean. He looks like the kind of person who probably doesn't eat any meals and just gets by on cigarettes and booze and Coke, which is what his character is in this movie, and that's very realistic, that physicality that he brings to it, by virtue of his build and his look. It really does sell his character all the more, as being the guy who it's whatever addiction he has is what constitutes his 3-course meal for the day. Whereas Berenger at this time, this is like peak Berenger. He does look like the kind of guy who probably he does still have very much an everyman quality about him. Berenger does, and a very blue collar look that works very well for him. But at the same time, this kind of at the top of his game part of his career, Berenger also looks like someone who might hit the gym a little bit and might be a little, because of that, less believable in this role. And also, I think, no disrespect to Weller, and this is completely subjective, I think Berenger also has a little bit more of that kind of classic. He's closer to the look of like a classic film star than Weller is. He's got a little bit more of that kind of classic sexiness. And so again, that I think kind of works against a little bit the realism of the character of Sam. And I think Weller is just through what he brings on a visual level, an aesthetic, just sells that better. And like I said, there are a bunch of future familiar faces amongst the teen actors playing Jake's friends. You got Christopher Garten in there, who's been in some of Darren Aronofsky's stuff, and the lead in Tremors 2. Josh Hamilton, who's like in everything. But biggest of all is Robert Downey Jr. And for him, this was only his second time that he had played a major role in a feature film, having the year prior been in John Sayles' Baby It's You, not counting disclaimer, not counting appearances in small roles in films that his dad had directed. He had been in 3 of his dad's films over the year in small parts, Robert Downey Sr. And the cool thing, too, about this film that kind of ties in with Robert Downey Jr. and everybody else is how delightfully 1980s it is. This film kind of, maybe because it's made in 1984, it's kind of like in the middle of the decade. It has all these crossroads of the 80s. There are different kind of looks, vibes we associate with the 80s. There's the whole, Michael Mann, Blade Runner, neon lights, punk, new wave vibe that we kind of associate with the 80s. And Robert Downey Jr.'s character kind of is that in the film. He's Jake's buddy who, you know, gets his hair gelled and wears sunglasses all the time and talks about how he wants to get a mohawk. Then you have the other part of the '80s that is has its appeal, but is a little less so for in my book. The kind of like the more pastel uh, based look of the '80s with the pinks and the off whites and the beiges. Um, Probably more late '80s in terms of its look that I would associate that with. Uh, you see that this is not the best example of it because I think this is an example of it in the worst way would be the TV show Newhart with Bob Newhart, which is a show I like, but the look of that show, the visual look with all the those kind of like pastel kind of block colors, it's really kind of bland. But there's a way to take those colors and take those visual foundations and make them appealing, more appealing. And I think in this film, like the scenes at the mall, stuff with Sarah Jessica Parker, her character with her sweaters and her slacks and stuff. That just kind of sells that part of the '80s. Reminds me of kind of like going school shopping for clothes at the mall in like '89 when I see some of those parts with her. And then another part of the '80s is another aspect of the '80s from a visual standpoint is kind of that classic Goonies cloak and dagger. Uh, you know, kids riding around their bikes, ET, with their hair slightly long, and they're just normal, everyday neighborhood kids. And that's really kind of sold by Jake, you know, just lounging around with his, his hoodie and, you know, getting on his bike and going places. And I don't know, the film just kind of takes the best from all the kind of the archetypes of what we think of from the 1980s visually. When you kind of tell someone, "Hey, remember what the '80s were like?" and they quickly flash back to like I said, Blade Runner or Cyborg or or Tron, then that's where like Robert Downey Jr.'s character comes in. Or if you say, "Hey, remember the '80s?" and they're like, "Oh yeah, E.T., Goonies and stuff like that," then that's kind of where a lot of the big chunk of the films kind of has that aesthetic, I would say. Um, the most points of it. And then, like I said, if you're thinking of like later in the '80s, like Wall Street or something of that nature, or maybe, like I said, the kind of the television sitcoms of the day, then that's where you have things like Sarah Jessica Parker's character comes in, and this one kind of mixes all that together and just kind of makes it very deliciously '80s. It does kind of have this diffused look to the way they shot it, which I think maybe they could have backed off on that a little. It's more so in the daytime scenes. Um, Very deliberate though choice. I always been I think that maybe they could have, yeah, backed off that just a hair. It kind of works on some level, I think, because the film's set in the fall, so it kind of builds on that and the kind of like it's almost about to rain all the time kind of look. Um, but it's a minor thing I mentioned. The music score by Michael Small is really solid all the way through. Really fits the mood of the scenes as you change from tense suspense based scenes to other ones which are lower key, and also the soundtrack just has some pretty decent songs. Very effectively uses the band's "The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down." There's a scene where Sam hears commotion going on downstairs while he's trying to sleep, and he sees his mom and Sam having a party with a bunch of people, and they're doing coke and off the pinball machine, and the whole thing's shot with kind of like these red light tones. Uh, and it's just a really good use of that song in that moment, and a really good aesthetic for that scene. But also on the soundtrack, you've got Wayne Chung, you've got Talk Talk. Um, got a really nice song, really good song I'd never been familiar with before called No Guarantees by the Nobodies, which is the song that plays over the trailer as well, which also it's a pretty good trailer, the way that's cut together. It's too bad there's not a really good copy of it online. You can check it on YouTube. Can't remember if there's one on the Blu-ray or not. But yeah, a lot of really good tunes on the film too. Very, very, in a good way, 1980s-esque. Uh, I think where the film's weakest part is like the last 15 to 20 minutes, because I think the film then does kind of shift into kind of standard, not suspense necessarily. I wouldn't say it totally changes into goes fully into that as a genre piece for the last 20 minutes, but it definitely, the way the the way the things start to unfold in the last 20 minutes, it just feels like you're kind of watching like a more traditional, typical, family-based suspense thriller movie at that point. And I think that the actual ending is kind of unsatisfying. Not so much in terms of the bigger picture of what happens, but just really the way it plays out. And part of that, I think, is because they had spent this time, like the last 15 minutes, having like these little chase scenes and bits of violence and fighting, physical fighting, so in confrontation, so that you're kind of in your as you're watching it, even if you're like, oh, I kind of wish this wasn't necessarily going into this direction as almost like a more of a suspense movie. I should say it's more of a cliched suspense movie. Still, at the same time, it's building up your adrenaline inside you as you watch, and you're kind of waiting for everything to to be finished off in an appropriate way. And then it just seems a little bit anticlimactic instead at the end. Also, and this is a much smaller issue that I had with the film, is that I don't think unless it flew by me or I wasn't paying attention, I don't think they ever once really address what Terry Garr's character does for a living. And that might seem like a really minor thing to nitpick over, but because so much of this film has to deal with her responsibility as a single mother and the way in which that responsibility is derailed and her relationship with her kids is derailed and her responsibility as a human is derailed by this uh, by Sam coming into her life and her letting him stay in her life, it just kind of begs the question, well, how is this impacting her ability to make a living? Um, because we see her relationship with her sons go downhill. We see her become needy towards this jackass played by Peter Weller. We see her kind of get involved with drugs and the house getting messier, and these things are very much pointed out to us. And to me, as I'm watching this, and I'm like, well, she's prior to Sam's arrival as the main breadwinner and still is because he's so irresponsible. How is this impacting her ability to just function at her job? And it never addresses that in any way, or even like I said, I don't think there's ever any mention of what she does for a living. It's just like she's not there sometimes, and this is even before Sam shows up. I just think that that's kind of because the film deals so much with her responsibility towards her in relationship with her sons and how that's negatively impacted, providing for them such a big part of that I just can't help but wonder, like, well, okay, is she messing up her job too? Is she about to get fired? What's going on with that? But perhaps some would say I quibble too much. But again, overall, I really enjoyed the movie. I think that some people might go into this and just be like, just it's a Lifetime movie. It's just an '80s theatrical release version of a Lifetime movie. Others might go into it and be disappointed that it isn't more of a suspense thriller horror movie all around. It might get the impression that it is more of that, kind of like the evil, like I said, the evil new boyfriend, evil stepfather kind of thing. But I think it's just an extremely well drawn, well portrayed, and very realistic portrayal of this situation. Um, of a very familiar, unfortunately, situation to many people, in which basically a parent, a single parent in a household with kids, uh, rejects the responsibilities they have in life in exchange for having companionship from someone who they have no business being with, and really making this go down so wonderfully as you watch it is it's by virtue of it being shot in the '80s, the fact that it was made in the '80s and it has this '80s soundtrack and these '80s aesthetic and just the look of what the kids are wearing. And I mean, I kind of grew up in this time. I was born in '82, so I was kind of like becoming self-aware about a year or two after this, but still, it was all very much at the look of what I grew up around. Uh, so perhaps people who are older or younger, that won't do much for them. Maybe they're wishing it was shot later or earlier, but it definitely, to me, that's just it's not really nostalgia. I mean, that's definitely part of why it's appealing. There's a nostalgia factor for me because I grew up then. But I just think that even if I didn't grow up during that time period, I just love that look. Just like I love the look of the '70s and the '60s, even though I didn't live then. I think that that's like I've always said before. It's really that late 50s through that kind of mid to late 80s is where everything, fashion and car design and music and architecture, everything was just on fire and different throughout that time period too. Like that 30-year time period, very much different, not just from decade to decade, but even from half decade to half decade. And this film evokes a lot of that, and showcases a lot of that. Like I said, this was put out on a Blu-ray by Olive Films, and so as with most of their releases, there are no extras, and also they pretty much just used whatever transfer Paramount had at the time. It's the same one I think that's on. You can watch it on YouTube or Prime. You can stream it there if you don't want to buy it. But if you do want to buy it, probably get it sooner rather than later. I don't know if there's even any more copies left. I think, though, it would be really nice if someone redid this film, brought a new addition to it, because the transfer definitely needs it needs a new transfer, a brand new transfer. This film, definitely some kind of as you're going into the film, there's kind of like some damage on the transfer, and it's just very much an older master when you're watching it. You can just tell. And like I said, this film has kind of like this diffused look to it that is never going to have, even with the best scan possible, it's probably never going to show the kind of clarity and detail that you might expect of like a 4K master or something of that nature. But that's fine, because that's the way it was shot. It wasn't shot to have that look. But all that being said, I think it really would benefit from a totally new scan, and also it'd be cool to kind of get to have this be released with some like extras on it. Obviously, Michael Apted is dead. Terry Garr's kind of even had a lot of health struggles over the years. Of course, Haim has passed on, and I don't know that you're necessarily going to get Robert Downey Jr. or Sarah Jessica Parker, but Christopher Clay is still he's on social media, and again, like I said, active as a voice artist. And there are other people like some of the kid actors who played Jake's friends, like Josh Hamilton and whatnot, are still around, and of course Peter Weller. So it'd be really cool to kind of see this get a new edition. Maybe it'll happen. Kino Lorber or Vinegar Syndrome that they're dealing with Paramount, they could jump on this, and I'd really love to see that happen. I definitely, is a film that it's definitely a recommended film for my part. Again, just the acting alone and the realism of everything. Having worked with child actors on The Last Frankenstein, all of whom did a great job, but that was a real learning curve for me. I had worked briefly with kid actors before The Last Frankenstein. I'd done a short film before that with a brother and sister who were played by real life brother and sisters, kids. But there's a lot to learn about working with child actors. It's obviously a very different approach than working with adults, which is no different than real life, I'm sure, but kind of stating the obvious here. But at the same time, just, big help was given to me by Gila Sheridan, because she had worked professionally as a teacher with child performers prior to being in The Last Frankenstein, and she was able to give a lot of help, especially with the scenes with Odo, the opening chase scene of The Last Frankenstein. And there was a lot there with just managing energy levels, because their energy levels are different, and the way that they might be spiking and be all over the place at one point, and then just really not feel up to something shortly after that. Just the difference in which they pay attention to things and pick up things, and obviously the difference in ways in which you can communicate with them. And so when I see a movie with so many child actors in it, and they're all totally nailing it, it's, I guess, as a filmmaker, it really hits me even harder. Like, wow. Yeah, good job, guys and gals. Very good job. No surprise, though. Yeah, it's interesting. It's no surprise when you watch this that like Downey and Parker went on to bigger things. They're really good, and it just kind of, and Haim too. But it's just kind of also, it's like, well, Christopher Clay was just as good too, and he really never was able to build upon that. I mean, obviously, still very much working in the business, which is great. But I guess that's just luck of the draw, maybe management. Who knows? Would love to see him do some more live action stuff again, though. I would definitely be interested in that, because he, like I said, he did a really good job in this. I mean, he's the poster. The movie poster is Christopher Clay. He's the title of the movie. He's the Firstborn. The title references to. He's the, again, even though I think Terry Garr and Peter Weller both get billing above him, and this was pre-RoboCop Peter Weller, he is the lead of the movie and just totally carries it. Incredible work. So, Firstborn, 1984. Check it out. And that will do it for this week's episode of Carpet City Cinema. Thank you again for listening. And please, just if you can, take a second to whatever streaming app you're listening to us on, just give us a positive review, a thumbs up, and whatever you can do to share the word about us on social media is greatly appreciated. And if you have any recommendations for future guests that you think might be good for the podcast, please feel free to shoot them out. All right, thank you very much, and have a good week.